Welcome back, guys. So I know this video is very late compared to previous years, but I've had a lot on my plate and haven't been able to get the video out until now, so I hope you can forgive me. But here we are. It's the end of 2024 and a lot of portable emulators have released this year, many of which I reviewed. Companies like Anbernic, Retroid, AYN, and Powkitty were busy this year releasing as many devices as they could. And I mean, if you throw a million devices at the wall, one of them has to stick. Which brings us here. This is a video I make every year, which previously has been formatted as kind of like a gift guide video talking about devices in different price ranges, but because this video is being filmed and released after Christmas, I've decided to switch up the formula a little bit. I'm switching it up a bit this year by not sticking to those categories. I'll just be talking about my 5 favorite handhelds of the year, regardless of their price range. But before we get into my official list, before we get to number 5, I do want to give a quick honorable mention to the AYN Pocket Evo, which I haven't had enough time to review yet, but have been loving. I only just recently got it, so I don't think it's fair to compare it to all of these other devices and put it on a list of my favorites when I only just recently got it, but it has been really cool to use and a lot of fun to mess around with. The controls are great, and so is that beautiful OLED 165Hz display, and it is a bit expensive at $500 for its cheapest model once it goes to retail, but I still think it's an amazing handheld regardless. I'll talk more about it in my upcoming review, but for now, it gets an honorable mention. Now that that's out of the way, let's get into the list. At number 5, we have the Nintendo 3DS, and this might confuse some of you because yes, it did come out 14 years ago, but before you start yelling at me, let me explain. I've always loved the 3DS, and I think it stood the test of time as one of the best gaming handhelds ever released, probably right underneath the Switch in that regard. It has kind of been forgotten by the general public in recent years because of Nintendo dropping support for it, its eShop shutting down, and the general lack of things to use it for, aside from just games. But the one community that has kept it alive, which is usually the case with these consoles that get shut down and have their support dropped by these companies, is the homebrew community. The homebrew community has been known to keep a lot of consoles alive after they've been shut down or had their support dropped by their manufacturers or the companies that made them, like the PlayStation Vita. But what sets the 3DS apart from those other consoles is just how much support it has gotten over the years, which makes it an incredible experience to use even 14 years after its original launch. It's incredibly easy to hack a 3DS using the most recent guides from 3ds.hacks.guide, the website, and the amount of things you can do with it afterwards just makes it a no-brainer. Whether it be emulation, game hacks, custom themes, using probably illegal apps to download games, or cheat codes, the amount of things you can do with a modded 3DS makes it, like I said, a no-brainer to do. The reason I included it on this year's list though is because I decided to actually use the 3DS a lot more than just for a modding video like I usually do. And that was partly because redproclub.com sent me this Year of Luigi 3DS XL that I actually love a lot. Can you see that? It's a beautiful 3DS. I was reminded just how many good Nintendo published games there are on here and how much work the homebrew community has done to make this feel like a fresh experience 14 years after it originally came out. It's not being sold officially anymore, Nintendo stopped manufacturing them a while ago, but if you can get one for a good price, I'd say to pick it up, mod it, and keep it with you, because not only is it the only official game console made by an actual game manufacturer on this list, it's also a really good portable emulator, which is what we're looking for. Moving on to number 4, we have the Anbernic RG Cube. In a year of devices that may not have stood out from each other as much as they might have wanted to, this one really stood out. Its main claim to fame is its square display. It's exactly 1:1 aspect ratio, which makes the device tall and thin compared to a lot of other devices. The screen was what drew me in the most about this device. It's not the first device to use a 1:1 aspect ratio display. Companies like Powkitty and some others have had devices with a 1:1 aspect ratio display before this one released, but it certainly is the most powerful one we have as of now. The screen lends itself to a lot of different use cases. Obviously 4:3 games are going to look great regardless, but what I think is a major selling point is how great 3DS and DS games look on here. More so 3DS, but I say that because the screen is big enough that both screens of the 3DS or DS when you're playing those ROMs can be shown on screen at once. Playing 3DS games on a single screen device with a more normal aspect ratio like 4:3 or 16:9 isn't that big of a deal, especially because you can set a button to switch between the devices, which usually for me is the thumbstick press, because the thumbstick on the 3DS doesn't press down. So that works well. But you don't realize just how much you miss until you have both screens in front of you and you can see both of them at the same time. The screens aren't going to be as big as they would be on something like an actual 3DS, but having both screens there regardless is a huge step up from only having one screen there and possibly missing out on stuff you wouldn't have known about. But aside from that screen, everything else is really good too. The controls are really great, and because the device is so tall, it feels really comfortable to reach down for the right stick and D-pad. Doesn't feel uncomfortable at all. The grips behind the controls feel really good, and so do the triggers. It shouldn't be that big of a surprise that the analog triggers feel really good, but they feel really good, and I think they're probably one of the best I've ever used. The novelty of this device being one of the few ones with a square display might seem like just that, a novelty, but it's really practical for dual screen gaming, and even 4x3 games look great on here. All of that is why I put it at number 4. Now let's move on to number 3. You're gonna put over by the 3DS. Number 3 on this list might confuse some of you, but I'll explain myself. At number 3, we have the Anbernic RG35XX SP. Yes, another Anbernic device, and keen viewers of this channel, frequent viewers, might know I haven't made a video on this device yet. That's because I only just recently got it. I recently got it and I'm working on a video for it, so if you want to be one of the first people to see that, subscribe, because it'll probably be out soon. Even though I've only had this device for a limited amount of time, I have fallen in love with it, and it has really become one of my favorite devices of the year. I, unsurprisingly, have no nostalgia for the Game Boy Advance line of systems, because I wasn't alive for them. I can appreciate them for what they were, and I think the SP, what this thing is mimicking, is a really cool device with a really cool design, but I have no personal attachment to it. That being said, this thing is amazing. It's the first device I've seen so clearly copy the SP's design. I know Miu is working on a Miu Flip kind of thing, but that's not out yet, so doesn't count. But like I was saying, this thing copies the SP's design, and it does it so well. I think a lot of people discount how great it is to have a device that opens and closes, and when it closes, it automatically goes into sleep mode and saves your progress in whatever game you're playing. And no, the Retroid Pocket Flip doesn't count. I don't want to say too much because I am working on a video solely dedicated to this device, but what I will say is that out of all of the Anbernic 35XX devices I've used up until this point, which include the 35XX, the 35XX Plus, and the 35XXH, this is my favorite. The controls are clicky and really satisfying to use. The base Anbernic software experience isn't that bad anymore, and having a Game Boy Advance SP style of handheld that I can close and that's a clamshell isn't something that I knew I needed and would love this much. What I guess I could consider another honorable mention that this device actually beat out of being on the list is the TrimUI Brick. The Brick is another device I'm working on a video for that will probably be out sometime soon. I don't know, all these videos are taking forever. But the SP beat it out because I love having a device like this. So Brick gets an honorable mention. SP is my third favorite of the year. Moving on down to number 2, we have the Retroid Pocket 5, a device I reviewed fairly recently and love a lot. It's been a busy year for Retroid. Back in the beginning of the year, they announced and launched the Retroid Pocket 4 and 4 Pro, and while they are very similar design-wise to their previous devices, they're a huge step up in terms of power over those previous devices. Then about half a year later, they decided to announce and release the Retroid Pocket Mini and Retroid Pocket 5, which I was very excited for, but was also kind of confused why the 4 and 5 were releasing in the same year. We'll talk about the Mini in a second. Don't worry, it's in this video. But seeing as the Pocket 5 is in this video, I'm sure you can tell which one I liked better. Sure, the 4 and 4 Pro were big steps up in terms of power from the 3 Plus, but that's not really saying much, especially since they used the exact same design. Meanwhile, the Pocket 5 has a Snapdragon chip in it, and also has this amazing new design I can't stop raving about. That design, oh boy, I can't talk about it enough. I love it so much. I've talked about this at length in my Retroid Pocket 5 review, so you can go watch that if you want a more in-depth look at the device, but this thing is just amazing. While it's not the only thing that put it at number 2, it's one of the bigger reasons, because oh my gosh, I think this thing is designed amazingly, it feels really great to hold, and I think just overall, it's a really good design that takes a lot of ergonomics and playtime into account. But what it's actually useful for is another thing that really sold me on it, and you might be surprised because it's not just emulation. Emulation is a really big thing on here, as it is on most of these devices, and this thing can emulate games really well. The Snapdragon chip inside of it is not the newest one, but the one that's inside of it can do up to Wii really well, and Wii U and Nintendo Switch with some tinkering. Those last two don't run amazingly. Wii U and Switch have graphical glitches, but if you're willing to tinker and are willing to know that not all these games will work well, it might be worth it if you end up getting the device. But like I said, emulation is not all this is good for. Game streaming is another big thing that really drew me into it. It's similarly priced to other streaming dedicated devices with a smaller form factor, more power, and is just a really good streaming device if you have good Wi-Fi. I've never been a big game streaming guy. I've tried it out once or twice, but I've never really used it all that frequently. And it wasn't until I got this thing and realized just how burnt out I am playing all of these same games on these same emulators over and over on all of these devices that I decided to put my Game Pass subscription to use and try it out again. And I ended up liking it a lot more than I expected to. Even when I was on my college's spotty Wi-Fi, it worked pretty well and got me to play Call of Duty, an online multiplayer game with very few graphical glitches or compromises. All of that wrapped together in this amazing device is what makes the Pocket 5 worthy of the number 2 spot. But if I had all of that positive stuff to say about the Pocket 5 and it's only at number 2, what could possibly be at number 1? Well, let's figure it out after some dishonorable mentions. So I only actually have 2 devices that I'd recommend you stay away from out of all of the devices I've reviewed this year, and they both happen to be mini devices. How fun is that? The first device I have here is the AYN Neo Pocket Micro. Yeah, this thing just did not do it for me. I reviewed it and thought I liked it. I gave it a pretty positive review, but now looking back on it and using it afterwards, and even with the frustrations I talked about in my review, this thing just really did not live up to the hype I had for it before it launched. The design, aside from one thing, is really beautiful and I really wanted to love it, but there are so many little things and some big things that annoyed me enough that it made it not worth it to go through the whole experience of using it. My portable SSD wasn't recognized when I first tried to set up and go through the whole process of transferring ROMs, which is like, fine, right? Like, it's annoying, but it happens. I can just connect it to my PC and then transfer files like that, right? Wrong. That doesn't work either. It was so frustrating because I had to use an FTP like I did on my RG Cube, but this was different because I didn't have any kind of cable that worked and there was no like solution to this at the time. There was nothing in the manual, there was nothing in the box, there was nothing I could find that had an actual solution to it. Apparently there was a solution, but I tried that and it didn't even work. So I'm not even sure what I was doing wrong. So that annoyed me out of the gate, but the one design flaw I talked about earlier is the joysticks. I talked about this in my review of the device, but they are too damn tall for a device like this. There would be plenty of occasions where I would go to use the D-pad or the face buttons and my fingers would hit the joysticks and do something, and it was just so annoying. I know some people have suggested, and I wish they did this, I wish they went with 3DS style circle pads for this thing, because that would have been so much better. I wasn't a big fan of them on the Retroid Pocket Flip, but they had a low form. What's the word I'm looking for? They just didn't take up a lot of space, and it was really nice, and I liked it a lot. I wish they went with 3DS style circle pad sliders because these are just too damn big. Those would have been so much smaller and would have taken up literally so much less space. Or even just use shorter sticks. Why are these so tall? They've pissed me off so many times while playing, and that's not even the only issue they've given me. Now, this is a smaller issue that you probably won't run into unless you have a case, but I was sent a case because I was one of the first backers on Indiegogo within the first 7 days, and an issue I ran into frequently when trying to put the thing in the case when I first got it before realizing I was doing it apparently wrong was that I would put it in the bag, and then I would take it out of the bag, and I would realize that one of the joysticks is just gone. This happened to me once when I was going to the gym. I put it in the bag and took it to the gym, and then once I got to the gym, the whole joystick was just off like that. And I looked around and luckily it was in the case. And that wasn't the only time it happened. I hate that I have to be so careful when I'm putting it in the carrying case. Like, the carrying case is what's supposed to protect it, not take all of this stuff off. There were also a lot of software bugs that just pissed me off in the end, like the SSD stuff I talked about in the beginning, and also apparently you can't use Bluetooth audio without disabling the controls because the same input that the USB-C port uses is the one that the controls use, which I don't understand. It's just a lot of stuff like that that added up to a poor experience, which is what I hate because I was so excited for this thing. At least the Pocket Evo has been better to me. But yeah, anyways, just avoid this device. There have been a ton of other devices released in the past year or in previous years that are better than this device and that I'd recommend over it any day of the week. Like another device in this list, the Anbernic RG35XX SP. It can play all the same games. That's not true. It can play mostly the same games, because I'm not sure who's going to try and play like Nintendo Switch or 3DS on this thing. This thing is technically powerful enough to do that, but I'm not sure why you would. But I would definitely recommend getting this thing over that any day of the week. So yeah, avoid that device and get something better. Moving on from that, the Retroid Pocket Mini was also another letdown for me this year. It's not a horrible device. I think all things considered, it's actually a pretty okay device, but I think it feels incredibly out of place at its price point and kind of just unnecessary. I got this thing thinking it would be a great device for 4x3 retro games, and I mean it is, but that's kind of it. The design is similar to the Pocket 5's design, which I love a lot, but this just doesn't feel as good. It's bulkier and it's not as mini as I'd expect a mini device to be. The whole no bezel selling point isn't really that impressive when you see that the bezel surrounding the whole screen is just as big as a potential bezel would have been. It just feels like they were trying to make a mini version of the 5 when that just isn't necessary. They could have done something unique for them. Maybe do a square display like the one on the RG Cube, or a vertical device. That would have set it apart both from the rest of their devices and the 5. But they went with a 2S redesign, and I don't think it's panned out the way they hoped. Maybe if it was a little less powerful and cheaper, I would recommend it, but seeing that at this moment it is $20 cheaper than the 5, which I would recommend 1,000 times more, and seeing as the 5 is on this list and the Mini is not, it's clear that this is just the inferior product. I don't have as much resentment for this one as I do the Micro. It's more so disappointment, because it's like what it could have been. It didn't have to be super powerful. It didn't even have to be as big as it is. It could have been like the Miu Mini or RG35XX. Be something small, but maybe with Android on it. That would have been super cool and super unique. But we ended up with this, and now we have to deal with it. Maybe one day we'll get those devices, but for now, this is what we have. So for the future, I say we move forward and leave the Mini in the past. At least that's what I'm doing. Like the Pocket Micro, I'd avoid this one if I were you. It's not the worst device in the world by any means, but I think there's just a lot of factors that go into this not being worth the price, or even worth picking up if you can get it for cheap. If you're looking at it on their website or any other website and you're thinking of picking it up, I'd recommend just spending the extra $20 and getting the Pocket 5. It's 1,000 times better in almost every way, and I think it's just more worth it. But now that we've gotten my least favorites out of the way, let's get on to my number one pick for my favorite handheld of the year. This might be funny to some of y'all since I just spent the last few minutes complaining about mini devices, but my favorite handheld of 2024 is the AYN Odin 2 Mini, and let me explain why. The obvious answer as to why it's my favorite is just because it's the one that I've been using, picking up, and returning to the most out of any device I've reviewed this year. I'm a big fan of most of AYN's stuff, and their Android line is amazing and no different. It was released back in the summer, and I've been using it a whole lot. As the name suggests, it is a mini version of the original AYN Odin 2, which released last year, which was actually named my favorite handheld of the year last year, which means they had a lot of work to do to make sure that this differentiated itself enough from that device so that people would like it and it would feel fresh. More so that they would even become my favorite emulator of the year. And seeing that it's here on this list, it's clear that they did. Just looking at these two devices side by side, it's clear that they changed the design a whole lot. And like the RG35XX SP, they based it on a very popular portable gaming system, the PlayStation Vita. Now, like the SP, I have no personal connection to the PlayStation Vita, but I can still appreciate it. And I'm really glad they actually went with the Vita design, because I think the Vita looks really cool, and on this device is a great design. It feels great to hold even with no grips on the back, and that's probably mostly to do with the sides that are basically half circles, but hey, it helps. It's also really powerful for being so small. It has a Snapdragon 8 Gen 2 chip in it, and 8GB or 12GB of RAM depending on which model you choose. And I chose the 8GB model. 8GB of RAM is more than enough for a device with this chip in it. I have the 16GB RAM model for the AYN Odin 2 original, and I thought that that was why I was getting such good performance, and it probably was in a lot of games, but 8GB is more than enough for a lot of games on here. I'm able to get emulators up to Nintendo Switch working really well with barely any compromises, so that extra RAM is not necessary. Also, everything I said about the Pocket 5 being a great streaming handheld also applies here. The only reason I wouldn't peg this as a good streaming handheld alternative though is because of the price. Yeah, $340 isn't horrible for a portable emulator, especially one with this amount of power, but it is $120 more than the Pocket 5, but it's more powerful, like I said, and arguably more comfortable at times. So it balances itself out. Price aside, I just really love this thing. Its beautiful mini LED display looks great with a lot of games, and it might confuse some people, but it really doesn't look that different from like OLED displays or even LCD displays. It's kind of a nice middle ground. The controls also feel really good. AYN's D-pads have always been probably some of my favorites out of any manufacturer in this field, but the joysticks and face buttons also feel really good. It's great for emulation and game streaming, like I said before, and the draw I've had to it ever since it released has made me certain that it's my favorite handheld of the year. We've seen devices that have been just as powerful or bigger or more ergonomic, but none of them have had the charm that this one really has for me. And as someone who's self-describably a huge fan of AYN's devices, I think it's really great that they were able to make a device that's basically the same as their device from last year feel completely fresh and new, so much so that I made it my #1 handheld of the year. Good on you, AYN. Well, there you guys have it. This is my official list of my favorite handhelds of the year, with a little bit of an exception for the 3DS. I know your list is probably really different from mine, so in the comments, tell me what your favorite devices of the year have been, devices you've hated, devices you've loved, if you have a ranking, or if there's just one device you bought in the beginning of the year or at some point during the year and have loved since. Let me know in the comments down below, and I will see you guys probably later this week, maybe next week, who knows? These videos take a while to make. Goodbye.